to look in the mirror, and that's one of the things I love to do with people is to look in the mirror. Now, I'm not just saying look and see what your hair is and your clothes and blah, blah, blah. You're really looking at who is that person looking at you? And that makes people really uncomfortable. But to be honest, with the experiential work that I do and the discussion, that's what I'm kind of getting at. Who are you at the heart? Who are you created to be? Because when we start peeling back the layers of this onion to say, this is what you believe, this is what the world says, it's like I believe there's gold that's under there, no matter what age of life you are, that it's untapped yet. There's resources that are untapped.
Well, that was special guest Dr. Myra Heckenlaible-Gotto talking about looking within to see the value each person can bring to the world. Hey everybody, Jared Sebesta here, co-host of Retire Repurposed. Well, on behalf of Ben Tages and myself, thank you so much for joining us here today. Well, Dr. Myra is an equine practitioner and certified giant coach. She's based in West Central Minnesota. And she believes that limiting beliefs are anything that hinders us from walking into God's fullness. In this podcast, Dr. Myra gives insights on ways to understand your own value and how you can bring that value to the world. Enjoy this episode. All right, I've got Dr. Myra on the phone here today. Dr. Myra, thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule and joining me on the podcast today.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I'm not going to attempt your last name. So why don't you share with everybody what your last name is and your title, which is also a handful.
Sure. My name is Dr. Myra Heckenlaible-Gotto. I did hyphenate, so that's a big one. And my two areas that I focus on now, after 35 years of working with people, I'm a certified equine gestalt practitioner and also a certified giant leadership coach.
I think people at home can understand why I didn't try to figure that out. That sounds very. I'm from West Central Minnesota. That's got German written all over. In fact, you have a little bit of a German accent as well. Is that part of the process of living in that part of the country?
I grew up with it. Absolutely.
I like that. So you're a coach. You help people of all ages. You use horses to do so. Talk about that a little bit. You're an author. We'll get to that, but talk about that. That's really interesting how you, again, you're in the equine services, or you use that as a tool to help people make transitions, which again is kind of like part of your message and what your book is about as well. Tie that together for people who are new to you.
Yeah. I have to say, let me back up a little bit. For 35 years, I've worked with people, 5 years old on up to advanced aging, and in different educational and mental health fields. But to me, it has always been one thing: helping people move forward, helping people heal, helping people grow, use their gifts. And so what I kind of do is, when I did my business, Crossing Life's Bridges, I really did that intentionally and put a lot of thought and prayer into that word. The crossing, it was kind of a subtle, with the cross is faith-based for me. And then life's bridges, meaning that, we have to go from point A to point B, and we don't always know how we're going to do it. And the bridges are so many different types of bridges, right? And so what I do is, when I've done it, I love the educational world and I love the mental health world. So for me to combine it, about 6 years ago, I ended up, after doing private practice and teaching school psych work, lots of things to get to know people as to how they tick, what makes them, move forward, is I got some certification in the equine gestalt. So I partner with my horses, not all the time. Sometimes I don't, but the horses have this gift, just like we all have gifts. Horses have these gifts too. They're very intuitive. And so people, when they come here, they don't ride the horses. That's not what it's about. It's really about the emotional connectedness, the intuitiveness, the part that humans don't always pay attention to. Our authentic self, we don't always give credit to sometimes. And it takes effort.
That's really interesting. I've been around horses, and they are very emotional creatures, certainly. And they're very large. And so I find it interesting that there's been a bridge cross, no pun intended, on using horses to help people with their mindset, with overcoming trauma, with dealing with transitions. That's such an interesting thing. I wouldn't have just initially thought of, but a great tool for people like you.
Yeah. And you know what? And the thing is, how I see horses, there's lots of different programs, right? But how I see them, they're truly my partners. I don't use my horses. They're my partners. They're my co-coaches. I'm in there with the people with them, and I'm watching the horses, and the horses are kind of figuring out because they feel energy, right? They have so much. We feel energy, humans, but we don't pay attention to it as much. Horses intuitively just get it. And so when they're doing things, they can help us decide and figure out what we do, how we move forward. I want the horses, of course, to be trained and have good ground manners for safety purposes, but how they interact with people is just organic. And it's different with every person. And so they give a side that I truly can't do. So when we partner together, it works great. So they can do that with individuals, with teams, and I still do things without the horses, depending on the season, because of course in Minnesota it gets a little cold. So we have a heated room that we just do with people. But they really, I guess, have brought me full circle of growing up on a farm in South Dakota. And we just the gifts it helps me to slow down,
Yeah.
because I have been very driven in my life, and I just don't think I'm done. I don't think God's done with me. So I just keep saying, okay, where do you want me next? How should I do this? And sometimes being outside the box has actually brought the biggest gifts out when we don't. And for me, speaking from experience, that has helped me drastically. And so I think I just like to bring that because that's who I am.
Yeah.
And I think when we're authentic, I think that's when our gifts shine, and then we can help others, right? And serve them. So it's kind of come full circle for me.
From a content perspective on today's show, the reason I brought you on is because you are in the space of just helping people with their mindset, with psychological health, mental health. We've been really hammering on the show lately mindset. We've talked extensively about limiting beliefs and identifying with goals and changing habits and pattern interruptions. And I think this is so relevant for retirees because this is such a massive transition, and anything that gets in the way is going to get in the way of people kind of walking into their fullness. So let's talk specifically about limiting beliefs. We've touched on it on previous shows, but in your opinion, how would you define a limiting belief?
I guess I would say limiting beliefs are either ideas or thoughts that we actually hold, either about ourselves or the world around us. And they actually hold us back from, I would say, really bringing our best self to the table, from really showing up as who we were created to be.
So let's talk specifically again for maybe retirees and pre-retirees. What's it look like? What's it sound like? How is it kind of manifested in the physical? How could you identify somebody? What would they have to say for you to say, you know what? There's something holding you back.
Yeah. Sometimes I'm going to go this way too. Sometimes you meet people and you just get a sense that there's something there, So some of these things that we're talking about, limiting beliefs, I don't think they're always all conscious thoughts. I think some of it is unconscious because some of these limiting beliefs that we have come from when maybe in our childhood, and nobody intentionally necessarily put them on us. But we've heard things over the time. We start believing things over the time. Our experiences tell us that. The world tells us, right? And so sometimes what people will do is, there might actually be a statement, not all the time, but I know I don't have much more to give, or I don't know how to do that, or minimizing their abilities or skills. Because sometimes when things come so natural for us that we're good at, we think everybody does it. But what we don't realize, it's a heck of a gift. And people are like, how do you do that?
Right.
Or like, I don't know what just happens, but we don't identify as that. And so we minimize it, which is a concern. And so people might actually verbalize that, I'm done, or there's nothing for me to do. But what they forget is what they've learned over time is invaluable. I can go to school and I love to go to school, but I go to school and I learn. But life and relationships teach you much more, in my opinion, than books can ever teach you.
We've said that. Sorry to interrupt. We've said that many times on the show where it's like, people listening, if you've lived on planet Earth for more than 5 minutes, you have a lot to give. The older you get, the wiser and more wisdom you have. And I sometimes see it, especially in the Christian world. I would say, and again, this is just my opinion and my theory, and I'd love to hear what you think of this. I feel like too many times in the Christian arena where we are, we want to be humble. I want to have gratitude. I don't want to seem like I'm discontent. I want to take a very humble approach to life, which I am all for, and those are biblical. But do you feel like it kind of comes out a little bit too diminishing and people set themselves short? Where's the line? I'm very type of like, so where is the line? Do you sense that with some people, especially from in the faith camp?
Yes. Yeah. And I think you hit on a part that I'm really passionate about is, kind of growing up too in the Midwest, you know, it was hard to really share your gifts verbally, because you needed to be careful because you didn't want to be coming off as arrogant or thinking you're better than. And so again, those are mindsets, those are beliefs, but limiting beliefs, and generations think differently. And so what we're realizing now in my generation is saying, whoa, wait a minute. I have some things to give, but if I don't share that, how is anybody ever going to know? And so I think it's a matter of just like any other communication, it's the how it's done. If I came off really arrogant and I this, yes, that's a whole different ballgame. But if you're sharing the gifts that you were given, you have to let people know that they're there. And to be honest, what I look at is saying, just because I want to keep moving and growing and shifting doesn't mean I'm not satisfied with where I'm at. I can be very satisfied with what I'm doing. I just think I'm a curious individual. I want to know. I want to keep giving. I want to keep growing. And what I know now, 10 years ago, I could not be that person. 5 years ago, I couldn't. Maybe from a cognitive head, I had some knowledge, but my experiences and relationships have added and has given it, the richness of that. So I think to be saying it's okay and we need to, because yes, and I was guilty of that. I minimized a lot because I didn't want to, or somebody else had it more difficult than I did, or this. And so I'm like, I downplayed even the emotions of when I had loss. Gosh, I had loss, but everybody has that. It's like, it doesn't matter if everybody has it. You're human, right? So what matters is how is it impacting you? That is not being selfish. That is taking care of yourself so then you can turn around and continue to serve others.
Where does that come from? Because again, what you're uncovering, you're making people aware to a limiting belief that they just assume is just part of who they are. But I think again, the awareness piece is huge. So for me personally, some of my mis thoughts and mindsets that are off, I can kind of date them back to, again, a mindset that was instilled in me. Where does that come from? Is that like I've in my own personal theology, it's like, is that like a small town, rural mid-America thing? Or is there something else with your generation that you guys grew up with that's instilled? Where, in your opinion, where does that come from?
Well, I think it does. You will see different belief systems culturally in different parts of the country. I can speak to where I grew up, in Midwest in South Dakota, and how people kind of thought. And I think it also plays into, and again, it's not to point fingers at, well, this is what happened here. It's just, it is what it is. And so what I think is important is that you uncover that and say, like when I grew up, this is what I thought I was supposed to do. Well, that's because that's maybe what your parents thought and what their parents thought. So some of these things are generational, right? And it might be within a family, or it might be within a town, a state, a culture. And so again, I don't think some of these things are done intentionally, but I think we have to step back and say, look, it's okay to shine. It's okay, because I think how we talk about ourselves, how we talk about the gifts, how we help people, it has shifted. And I don't think that shifting is a negative. I think it's more like we have to, if we were uncomfortable with it, we have to learn how to get uncomfortable or comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I don't think that is being prideful or arrogant to say, wow, I do have a lot to offer. Right. I do have a lot to give. I am special, and again, that can be taken, you get a group of Christians together and you talk about how special you are. There will be some in the group who are like, what's up with this guy and gal? Like, she's really full of himself. Like that's a limiting belief that person has, because they're looking, from what I've seen, limiting beliefs are kind of that filter by which you look and absorb the outside world through kind of what could be a fogged filter.
Yeah. And I think on that, I think you're right. The topic, when people share that about themselves, it can make people uncomfortable. But what I would turn around and want to say is, okay, tell me what your gifts are. And what we find a lot of times is when I've worked with people over the years, if I said, hey, can you give me 5 things that you maybe aren't happy with, you don't necessarily like, or you want to change about yourself? They whip those off like crazy. And I'll even say, nope, I only said 5, and they want to go 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, right? And I'll say, okay, so let's turn this around and say, what are some things that are really kind of cool about you? What are some things that you're good at? And what they'll do many times that they might go to roles. Well, I'm a mom, I'm a good mom. I maybe do whatever, whatever. They stumble. And so what I find is that we don't describe ourselves in really wonderful terms. And that's not uncommon, because again, people thought that was arrogant or boastful. But at the same time, it's just that I don't think we had the chance to do it. I don't think it was encouraged. I don't think it was necessarily, and I think as humans, many, many times humans always look at what's wrong instead of what's right. And so to look in the mirror, and that's one of the things I love to do with people is to look in the mirror. Now, I'm not just saying, look, see what your hair is and your clothes and blah, blah, blah. You're really looking at who is that person looking at you? And that makes people really uncomfortable. But to be honest, with the experiential work that I do and the discussion, that's what I'm kind of getting at. Who are you at the heart? Who are you created to be? Because when we start peeling back the layers of this onion to say, this is what you believe, this is what the world says, it's like I believe there's gold that's under there, no matter what age of life you are, that it's untapped yet. There's resources that are untapped. And we've got to take the time to do that. And I know it's not comfortable for people, but everybody has that in them, but they have to give themselves the chance to do it. And I know that's not easy for everybody to do. It's easier said than done.
What I've encouraged, again, for especially people in the faith-based camp who feel uncomfortable doing that, it's like there's gold inside of there, and they kind of, tense up and tighten up. What I would challenge them to think is that God has put that in there. He formed you in your mother's womb. So he's given that to you from the very beginning. Go back to the parable of the talents. Now, if you don't utilize those gifts, that time, talent, treasure, are you truly paying homage to your creator? That's another way to flip it. By you not uncovering the gold that's inside of you, are you truly honoring your creator in that? Well, that now really challenges a limited belief, because now all of a sudden it's being looked at from a completely different angle.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because I think, again, people sometimes when they do things, they don't realize it's the gifts. So I think part of it also has to be, as humans and caring people and faith-based people, is we have to be willing to start telling people what we see, sharing with them, putting words to it. Because if they can't put words to it, when we go up, I mean, how often do we give people compliments? How often do we let them know what they're doing and said, hey, thanks? If we start describing what we see and we start letting them, and we put words to it, then people start going, oh, maybe, or I haven't thought of that. And I think humans, it's this dance between relationships that we not only have to look at ourselves, but I think we're called to let other people know what we see in them. Because, again, it's like if we want to change that limiting belief, then we have to hear the other side. What do people see in us? Because the more often we hear that, we're going to go, you know what? Maybe. And then we can foster it. So I think it's a dance. It's not a journey. We have to do it by ourselves.
One habit that I've picked up on is I try to reach out to at least 1 to 3 people a day. And I usually do this in the morning. If somebody's on my heart, it's just to give them, it's not like a check-in. It's just to say like, hey man, thinking about you today. Appreciate you. Fill in the blank. Just the relational capital that builds, not only in them, but the attaboy that gives me, it helps me with my own limiting beliefs. Many times I found it more valuable than the value that they may get from that. And then when that's reciprocated to me, I'm not doing it to get it reciprocated, but when other people have said those things about me, it almost changes my identity. And again, that's a major problem, limiting beliefs, because it shifts your identity. If you don't understand who you are, you will not act in the way that you were created to act. Do you agree with any of that, or am I kind of out in left field?
Oh, no, I agree with that. And I think, part of that is it's the gift, because everybody wants to be, I've not met a human being, I don't care what age, that doesn't want to be seen, valued, appreciated, right? And so what we have to do many times is we have to realize the gift that we have that we can give other people. And that comes with being able to know ourselves, to see what works for us, what doesn't work for us, and to be willing to, honestly, you got to take that step. You got to give it a shot to make some movement.
Yeah. That's really, really good stuff. I love that. We got a couple minutes left.
Okay.
And I want to give this some legs. We've identified some limiting beliefs that people have, perhaps retirees and pre-retirees, of just kind of like, well, I just don't really have any more to offer. How do we, like, what's the magic pill? What can we say to these people? Like, again, I feel like so many times on the radio here, we're just like trying to, like, you know, beat people upside the head with this idea of like, no, you are valuable. Don't just take retirement and just sit and do nothing and just fall into the shadows of the world. What do people do? What can you tell them?
You know what? I kind of break it down into 4 different things, to be honest. I think when it starts I think you have to, like we were at kids, you know, have a childlike heart. We talk about that, right? But be curious. Be curious. Say, is it possible? What could I possibly do? How could I do this? I mean, just ask the question. Allow your curiosity to come up, because if you don't, you're going to stay stagnant. So I would say encourage that curiosity in yourself and have an open heart and open mind with it, and do it in prayer. You don't have to have the answers right now, but just the curiosity. So that'd be the first thing. Second thing I'd say, you know, you have to connect with yourself. That's that self-awareness piece there that we're talking about. And that's when I'm saying, you know what, we got to look in the mirror. And sometimes we can do that on our own. And sometimes we need assistance doing that. So that's great either way. But look in the mirror. That it can be very uncomfortable looking at that person in the mirror, because we're not used to just focusing like eye to eye with it. But I got to tell you can't shift if you don't own it. So you have to connect where you are in different seasons of your life. So once the curiosity is there and you say, okay, I'm going to look, you start looking, then you'll start getting some clarity. And I think that's where it comes from. Sometimes it's a cognitive understanding of where someone's going, like what message are we giving ourselves? So it's a rational thought. I think that's part of it. The other part is also experiential. Listen to your body. Our bodies are valuable tools. They're telling us things. I mean, that's why they say so much for the mental, emotional health, which are 2 different things. One's kind of more the head and one's the heart, right? But it impacts our physical being. And we don't give credence to that all the time. We were made as wholeness. And so we have to listen to that and say, you know, what's in our control, what's not in our control, because that trips us up. And then the last thing, I think, once we get some clarity around that, and it is a process, it's not like 1, 2, 3, let's just do it. We have to be willing to do it, is really then you shift. I don't think you have to change. Change scares people sometimes because it's a big word. So I say I always tweak or I shift. So I like these little things because, and it's with intention. So you shift with intention, and it's just bit by bit. You consider, you look at it something else. You look one way. You actually make one little step. Anytime you make any movement, it's movement. And it's intentional. It's your mindset. It's your actions. And then you say, okay, am I going to respond? Or am I going to react? And if you want to keep using the gifts that you were given, you have to do it with grace and compassion. You know, we're tough. Many humans are tough on themselves, including me. And to give ourselves some grace and compassion, because we normally give other people a lot more than we give ourselves. So I guess if I'd say, so keep that curiosity going, ask people, ask the questions, connect with who you are, because people can't do it for you, but they can go along the journey with you. Get some clarity, and then shift with intention. That's kind of my little recipe for being able to have your head, heart, and gut aligned.
I love it. I think it's great. I think those are some really, really good takeaways. And I love the idea of almost just kind of really connecting with yourself. And I think people need to hear that, where God has planted gold. Yep. And, he's the ultimate gift, but he has also planted a lot of gifts in you, whether you're retired or not. And those gifts need to come out, and the world needs those. We got about 30 seconds left. Let us know where people can find more about you, more information on what you're doing and the message you're putting out in the world.
Absolutely. My business, again, is Crossing Life's Bridges, and we're in Carlos, Minnesota. A lot of times we do in person, but we do some online. So they can look at us at website is crossinglifesbridges.com. We're on Facebook. Facebook at Crossing Life's Bridges. You can email me at Myra at Crossing Life's Bridges is my number. And I'm just starting to do some LinkedIn, so I'm getting the social media figured out, right? But awesome. Yeah, go ahead and take a peek on there. If you have questions, shoot me an email, give me a call, and I'll be glad to get back to you.
Well, I sure hope you enjoyed this conversation with Dr. Myra. Until next time, I'm Jared Sebesta. Remember, don't retire, become repurposed. We'll see you then.
Securities offered through Avantax Investment Services. Member FINRA SIPC. Investment advisory services offered through Avantax Advisory Services. Insurance services offered through an Avantax affiliated insurance agency.